Today we are making an item tier list. And this item tier list will focus on physical damage-oriented items. I got this request a while ago, and I thought it was an interesting idea just to see where items are in the current meta, because we usually primarily look at the guards, but the items are also very interesting in that context. And as you can see, the space here is somewhat limited, and I couldn't really fit in more here because that also would mean that I would have to fit in more here, and I decided to do this in Photoshop because there is no official item tier list setup. I figured I'm gonna start with the physical damaging items in order to have enough space and have enough time to talk about each individual item. And depending on how this is received by you guys, if you like this or not, I might do a magical damaging items and a defensive item tier list in the future. Now, first, I should probably say that not all of these items are purely focused only on damage. Some are hybrid items, some are bruiser items, and some fit in other ways. But I kind of put the threshold around the area of items like Winged Blade, Witch Blade, that are more specific defensive counters, and then the only exception there is Toxic Blade, which is a bit more aggressive, whereas most of the items here will be rather obviously to the aggressive side. Now, before we get started, another note here as well. I changed up the tier list tiers a little bit. I took out A+ and A-. Instead, I have triple A here. This is all just A because I think there are going to be a lot of items around A, and I think the A+, A- really isn't that relevant in the context of an item tier list. I'd rather have a little bit more space there and not separate it too much where it just gets wonky at some point. And instead, items that are better than average are S-, that are way better than average are S, that are even better than items that are better than S are S+, and items that are just mandatory by every game would be SS. On the other hand, we have items that are slightly worse and more situational than average items in B. Then we have items that would be very, very niche and maybe just useful for a few guards and a few situations in C, and complete trash items that you should never buy in D. Let's begin with Assassin's Blessing. Now, Assassin's Blessing, I think, is very straightforward. Assassin's Blessing is an item that when you're playing jungle, you will need. I don't think the stats themselves are exactly the greatest. I think there are quite a few items that would be nicer if you had the room to get them, especially since the upgrade version gives you 10 pen and that's it for everything outside of jungle. So it's one that you want to sell in late game for sure. But with it being so mandatory for jungle, it can't be worse than A. You have to use it in pretty much every game as an assassin regardless. It's just more so that the stats don't offer that much. The next is Attacker's Blessing, actually a non-conquest item, which I think is better than average. This item also gives you 10 penetration when it's upgraded, but it's very, very easy to upgrade, and it's also an item that comes with extra power on top of the penetration. So it's just double good, basically. And I think outside of Conquest, if you're playing an aggressive guard in any other mode, there is not much of a reason not to pick it up. I think I would pretty much pick it up in almost every game, or not quite every game, but on a lot of characters as well. Not just on assassins, but also on aggressive warriors, or sometimes on hunters, depending on what you're after. And overall, I think it's a very strong choice. I'm kind of torn between S and S- here. I think I will go with S, actually. I think this is actually better than just a little bit better than some other items. And I think Hi-Rez actually hinted that they might nerf it sooner or later, because I think it just has a lot for a very cheap price and a very easy way to stack it. And then we have Hunter's Blessing. And Hunter's Blessing, while mandatory, kind of like Assassin's Blessing, is more useful than Assassin's Blessing in later stage of the game. The damage just transitions into everything, and there's almost never a hunter that doesn't build it. You have the very, very rare case of an ability-based hunter going straight into Transcendence, but even those will often go into Hunter's Blessing first, at least as long as they're in ADC. And for that position, for that role, I think it's a very strong item. Again, I think this is better than, just a little bit better than average. I think for hunters, this is such a good item that you can keep very long into the game as well with a little punishment. You can kind of keep it until you trade it out for late game crit or something. So I think this is a very, very strong one. And then we have Mage's Blessing. Now keep in mind, this is for physicals. For Mage's Blessing may have a bit of a different position. We talk about that when we get to that. And I think Mage's Blessing is not quite as good as Hunter's Blessing. I think damage-wise and everything, in terms of its potential, it's a very good item, nonetheless, but just not quite on the same level as Hunter's Blessing. I would say, on the other hand, it's above Assassin's Blessing because it still has more applications in later stages of the game, more usefulness. Also, CDR is a very valued stat on certain characters, so for them it's very, very good. And I will say this is an S- item. And last but not least, we have Warrior's Blessing. Warrior's Blessing has fallen off quite a fair bit. It is just not that valuable right now. And if we would just purely speak about right now, then I would put it in B. Thing is, we have changes coming up to the meta that should favor more aggressive warriors with the next patch already. And so I will make a prediction here, and I will say that there's a good chance that we won't even be able to use Guardian's Blessing in solo anymore. And it's also, outside of Conquest, a very nice item for early aggression through the extra sustain that you get. And I will put this in A. Again, this is a bit of a prediction. I think this item will be better again when aggression is a bit more favored. Because there are alternative choices. You have Berserker's Shield, you have Gladiator's Shield, or you have other items that you can go into. But I think Warrior's Blessing will still be a good foundation. And that brings us to the boots. And when it comes to the boots, those I think are some of the most underrated items in the game. We often try to do something that allows us to skip boots somehow. But at the end of the day, boots just have such good stats by default that there's almost no reason to ever skip them. And yeah, as such, I think they are actually among the strongest items in regards to what you get for the price and the benefit that you get in early stages of a game. In very, very late games, some guards can trade them out if you have multiple movement speed items. And that's probably the reason why I don't want to put them in the super highest tiers, because then they should be useful for late game as well. But due to their price and everything, I think they are very good overall. And for Ninja Tabi, this is most definitely true. I think somewhere between S and S+, I will go with S here. And maybe I'll reconsider this and bump it up a bit. Reinforced, kind of the same situation for tanks, but I think a little less value overall when we're looking at aggressive characters, at damaging items overall. It's more of a niche choice for damaging characters compared to, say, Ninja Tabi or Warrior Tabi. I don't want to put it too low, because that would be misleading for the purpose of it also being used as a pure defense items, because that's really what it's good for. So if we're talking about this just from a defense perspective, then it's probably still around S. But if we're talking about this from a perspective of how useful is this item for, say, a jungler as well, or a warrior that's not specifically looking to go into a counter matchup, then I would say it's more of an A. It depends on the situation, and it can range from very strong to just, an okay pickup. Then we have Warrior's Blessing. Here we have the same scenario as with Ninja Tabi, Warrior Tabi. Same scenario as with Ninja Tabi, only difference being that one is more for ability-based characters and the other one is more for AA-based characters. Helps a lot more with clear most of the time, but then again, Ninja Tabi has a little bit more late game potential. Talaria, I think is more situational. I think it's still very strong because it's boots, and on some characters it works very well. In certain builds, it works very well. And I think it's not niche enough to say it's a B tier kind of item, because again, it's still boots. You're still gonna build them and they're still gonna be good. But I think you don't use it as frequently on as many characters. Then again, if you're running it on Mercury, there's absolutely nothing speaking against that. And then we have Berserker's Shield. Berserker's Shield is one of those items that I think is slightly better than average. And that is also partially due to the fact that, again, next patch, aggression in solo should be valued higher, and that will definitely bring up Berserker's Shield a little bit more, because this item still offers a ton of sustain for the guards that can make use of it. It's just not quite as broken anymore because, for example, Erlang Shen doesn't have the same interaction with it, and that's a good thing in my opinion. And if we see more AA warriors in solo again, we're going to see this item a lot more as well. Asi. In my opinion, among the weaker lifesteal items at the moment, and among the weaker items in general. There are niche hunter builds where you can build this, especially in late game. When you haven't built devils in early game and you want some sustain, then this is your option. So I'm not saying it's terrible, I'm not saying you shouldn't use it, but I think it's not quite on the same level as other lifesteal items, or similar items in general at the moment, and as such, I will put it in B. I think it's good, it's not quite as good. Gladiator Shield, I think, is in a similar situation as Berserker Shield, but I'm not quite sure if I'm willing to put it into the same tier. I think I will, but mostly due to the fact that we have more and more gods that can make really good use of it. For them, for most gods it would be an A, but then there are some gods where it's literally S+, basically. If you're looking at King Arthur, if you're even looking at still Cuchulainn, those gods just make it much, much better than just an average item. And for them, it remains much better. So I think it's more than, yeah, what we have in A tier right now. Ekival, our classic transition item. I think Ekival is often underrated. I think it can still be a very good item, but often we see people going straight into crit at the moment. So I'm a bit torn here if it's more of a B or an A item, but I will give it the benefit of the doubt and say it's A, and that can kind of shift with the metas, and if crit is favored at the moment, or if pen is favored, if a more aggressive lane is favored or not, and depending on that, it just bounces up and down a little bit here and there. And Seele. And Seele, in my opinion, an excellent item for countering a lot of gods. It's the choice for any assassin when it comes to having some magical defense in their kit, while still getting a good mix of stats for a relatively cheap price as well. So Seele for me will be an S- item. Odysseus Bow, I think, is very average. Odysseus Bow is maybe a little bit better than Ekival if we look at them side by side, because it has a lot more late game application. I think it's often undervalued because of the bounces, and the bounces are technically the strongest DPS in the game, and we've seen scenarios even in the SPL where this works out, but in other games when the hunter is playing more 1v1, kind of not getting the room to really focus down the entire front line of enemies, or the entire line of enemies, so to speak, and has to deal with a single assassin, it just has a lot less value in comparison. Still a very good item though, nothing wrong with it. It's a late game item, just not a super highly valued one in my opinion. And the same goes for Runic Shield. I'm kind of almost tempted to put it into B. I think it's a good item. It's just that it falls off a little bit in late game. It's still picked up in solo, don't get me wrong. It's definitely picked up to counter out a lot of matchups, and that's why I think it belongs in A. But the power reduction of 50 often doesn't matter as much as other kind of negative auras for the enemies would in later stage of the game. Hydra's Lament. Yeah, I don't think Hydra's Lament is that good at the moment. I think it is too niche. It's kind of cool in theory. I like the way it's thought out to be and the way it's supposed to work. But the problem with it is that it's built for ability-based characters primarily, and most ability-based characters do not have room to stick to enemies for long times and consistently get in the basic attacks in between. It can work, sure, but quite often you get punished for sticking to the enemy so closely for too long, and you're better off just, you know, getting Crusher and throwing out your damage while being safe, or don't necessarily having to stick the enemy directly, and then just getting back in, back out, and not trying to get those basic procs off. So in the situations where you can use it, I think it's still a very nice item. I think when I think about it, it's not quite C, but it's definitely more of a weaker B tier here. B tier, yeah. Speaking of C, we have Atalanta's Bow. Atalanta's Bow is not completely without use. It can be used, for example, in a specific Bakasura build. It can be used on characters that have this focus on basic attacks and want to stick to enemies. So, you know, if you already have Haste Katana, you can throw it after that. But at the same time, it's so limited in who can use it effectively. And even they don't build it all the time. Like with Bakasura, it is being built, but definitely not every single time, not even in the Pro League. You have the Stone Cutting build, which works just as well, if not often better. So I will give this a C. There is niche uses where it's possible to use this, and it can be effective. Not a lot of them, not a lot of gods, and as such, it remains an outlier. Blackthorn Hammer is in a similar area as well. I think Blackthorn Hammer has a little bit more going for it. It just has a nice amount of stats right now. But it's also something that definitely not every character can make use of. The gods that come to mind for it right now are definitely King Arthur, also Guan Yu, and if I remember correctly, then Kukulin can technically get the CDR passive all the time as well. So there's some gods where you can use it, and the point is that on those gods it can be very, very effective. I think heard of people using it on Vamana as well and stuff. Overall, it's still one of the weaker items, but it's kind of getting there. It's finding more use. Silver Branch Bow might be the worst item in the game right now. I think this is just D. I'm gonna be bold here and say this is just D. Silver Branch Bow has this interesting passive where it gives you more power when you have more attack speed over the cap. But the conversion rate is terrible, so it's not worth it. And if you're overcapping, then maybe you should just build something other than that, which makes it more effective. It basically rewards you for building inefficient, but it doesn't reward you enough to justify picking it. And I don't see any reason to really consider picking it in any situation. So I think this is the worst item we have. And then we have Golden Blade. Golden Blade is interesting because when it came out, everyone was just complaining about how horrible it is and how it destroys the meta and how it should have never returned. Not everyone, but a lot of people. And that was for a brief period, and now it's kind of forgotten again. And why is that? Because there was really only one god that was completely broken with it, and that was Mercury with his interaction with the One. Other gods can use it, like Kali, like Bakasura, but with none of them it's as much of an issue as it is with Mercury. And I think it's more of a niche item now. Not a bad one, but I think it's not particularly great for most characters, so I think it's just a B tier one. Hasten Katana. For some gods, this is a really strong item. It's not for everyone. It's got to be said here. Not everyone should pick this up all the time. Most certainly not. Only the gods that can make use of it. But for those gods, it's very, very, very good. I am kind of tempted to put this into S even. I think it's for certain gods better than the items in S-. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in S. Tendency between here somewhere. Because, you know, you can get away without Berserker Shield on an AA god. But getting away without a Hasten Katana on the gods that make use of it, like on a Bakasura for example, is a lot harder. It's possible. There are workarounds, but it's super rare that it will actually be a useful decision basically. So yeah, S. Toxic Blade. Weird mix of stats, super niche, and the application is worse than Brawlers as well for no reason really. Because you have to like double hit it, then it sticks to them longer because you can hit more basics on them, but really, really niche. And most of the time not worth building, unfortunately. I think this item could be a lot better. It could be a lot more interesting. I think AA items in general, probably some of them need a little bit of a look at, and I think Toxic Blade is one of those. I'm not sure the health on that. Why? On the other hand, Devour's Gauntlet, always a staple item for ADCs, sometimes replaced by Transcendence, but for some gods, Transcendence is even worth considering, so Devil's definitely up there. I think still one of the best items you have as an ADC specifically. For most others, it's not worth it, but for them, it's so good that I think this is an S item. Maybe S-, but I think overall an S item. Frostbound Hammer. Super, super niche. Can be used by some gods in some situations. Can be decent. Not many, not often, but we can't completely ignore the fact that it exists when, for example, Vamana in specific situations when you don't go Hasten Katana can make use of it, or yeah, some AA warriors in general. Maybe with the rise of AA warriors it come back a little bit more. For now, I think it's below the likes of the B tier of Golden Blade and really just there for a few gods. And as we're speaking of hammers, I think Runeforged Hammer is kind of in the same situation. Very, very few gods that can potentially make use of it. It always goes back and forth between being too strong or too weak because it has defensive stats overall, but then has this passive that can actually make it really aggressive. But I think right now, it's more of a C tier item for very few specific characters. Maybe bouncing up to B wouldn't be wrong, depending on who you're thinking of playing it with, but it's just a situational. Especially when you like don't even see gods like Naja building it. It's like, not quite there. Hatsuka. Also pretty situational. I think it can be really cool in a high ability burst build. It can be useful on some. But it's always kind of like, do I want this or do I get more out of Crusher? And most of the time, similar to Hydra's, it's you probably get more out of Crusher. And with this one, you also have to stack it first. And I think with how the stacking mechanic currently works, it's kind of like it forces you to use basic attacks while it's an ability-focused item at the same time. But at the same time, it's so many basics that you probably can't proc it more than once during a fight, whereas like Hydra's would do a lot more. But on the other hand, you can proc it at range. It's nice, I like it, but I only see it being used on a very few gods. Like last item on Hunters for like burst and that kind of stuff. It's close to B, but I think for now it's a C item. Soul Eater, on the other hand, is getting a lot more interesting. I think Soul Eater was more of a niche item once upon a time, but with the rise of more gods that can make use of it, and with more people finding ways to use it, it's getting a lot better. For Pele, this would definitely be way higher up. Then you have gods that can run it in solo as well, like a lot of the warriors, especially, I think originally it started with Sun Wukong, and then more and more warriors like Kukula and stuff kind of figured, you know, or warrior players, like, we can throw this in with our AoE damage and can heal up that way, and as long as you don't get hard countered, this is actually very nice. Titan's Bane. You build it because you have to against tanks, but it's not as good as it used to be. Like, it used to be like a super important item every build, but now we have other options. We have the option to go for more pen and go for Void Shield and just not focus on the tanks. Yeah, and not every aggressor needs it, and also it competes with Executioner. So, yeah, it's right here. Brawlers, always a great item, always strong. I think Brawlers is one of those items where as soon as there's healing on the enemy team, there's not much you can go wrong with if you choose Brawlers. It's just this anti-heal plus a lot of damage at the same time. Yes, please. Like, what more do you want? I think it's an excellent item overall, and definitely a high tier one. If you're not building Brawlers, you're not helping your team. If there are any healers on the enemy team, a lot of self-sustain or something like that. Executioner, solid item, could be an S, but I think it's more of an S minus item. Just, you know, a very good pickup. Has a bit more competition than some of the S items here with Titan's Bane in certain situations. But overall, you know, on most ADC builds, you will be building Executioner anyways. It's not so much of a contemplation between multiple choices, but more like when in the build do you build it? And how good is it at that point? And as such, it also competes with Concise, but we'll get to that. So, yeah, I could justify putting it into S as well, but I think it's just above the average items, and I think it's kind of here with these kind of item choices, whereas the other ones are a little bit more core. Like Devils, for example, has less competition in the own item tree than Executioner has. It's only the rare case of RCU. Or Hasten Katana, there is nothing that's really like Hasten Katana, except for maybe Atalanta's bow, but that's also like significantly weaker. And yeah, Executioner has like a competitor that's a bit closer. John's Wrath, once upon a time the staple item on everyone, not so much anymore. I think John's Wrath is good, but that's it. Most of the time, you will be picking something else over John's Wrath that's more fitting for your character, for your playstyle, unless you're specifically looking for a lot of CDR. But at the same time, it's not niche enough to be like B tier, because you can still pick it on so many gods and it can be useful. Shifter's Shield. Always an interesting item that just has a weird mix of stats that's kind of like awkward through that. Thanatos is one of those gods where you can consider it, but even for him, you have other options now. You have options like Blackthorn, you have options like even Runeforge if you want to, whatever. I think I'll give this a C. I don't think it's as frequently used or useful as the items in B, though it's one of the better items in C. Poison Star. in my opinion, one of the best crit items, if not the best crit item. It's just so rewarding because it's, you know, one of the cheaper ones. It has a lot of useful effects that go beyond just being a crit item. And yeah, I just think if there's one crit item you want, it's usually Poison Star. This is a secondary one, it's obviously Deathbringer, but if you could just get one, then this is the one for you. Unless you're obviously looking more towards ability damage and malice and that kind of stuff. But this one is just such a nice setup item and everything at the same time, and the damage reduction, all that's cool. Rage, on the other hand, a little bit more average. It simply has a stacking mechanic that makes it so situational if it's good or bad. Generally, it's a good item though, and crit is generally strong, so I would say it's not worse than A for sure. The Crusher. With the Crusher, I am tempted to go higher than S, but I'm not sure. I think the Crusher is still to this day the most underrated item on certain characters. Like the fact that it has attack speed, it has power, it has a high amount of penetration, which means it has more ability damage than most other similar items, and it also comes with extra damage on top of that, makes it such a strong choice. But I did put Brawlers into S, so I think Crusher is in S as well. I think it's more of a, how do you put that? Like the lack of countering something in specific other than stealth that can be broken is maybe the reason why I wouldn't put it in S+, like as opposed to Brawlers, which allows you to counter healing. So I think a very strong item overall, but maybe not quite good enough for S+ yet. Maybe a little bit too expensive for that as well. Masamune has kind of fallen off a little bit. I don't see as many situations where I consider it useful anymore, because I think especially since like I think before the buffs and before the changes and all that, I think it was a bit more in a different position against the Void Shield, if I remember correctly. So I would say it's still solid, but it's just not as easily applicable in most situations to like fit in your build. I'm not even sure if I want to go B, because I really don't know when I would be building it very frequently. But I guess has some benefits in context of smaller defense items. Hard to say. I know on lower levels of play it's often very valued still. I'm still torn. No, maybe considering that Hydra's is C, it's more of a B item. But really, it could easily be C as well. Stonecutting Sword. Still very nice on some characters, not as great on many others. It's just that the protection reduction can be very, very nice for some. The flat protection reduction just does a lot against squishies, and that shouldn't be underestimated. And it can really help your team as well sometimes. So for those who can make use of it, it's very, very strong. Not always core, but also rarely in a situation where you don't want to pick it up either. But also more of a weaker A, so this could also be like a B tier item. Transcendence, I'd say A. It's a strong A. It's a much stronger A than Stonecutting Sword. Stonecutting is maybe, I will put Stonecutting in the bottom row of A. I will say that I will make it clear that it belongs a bit lower, whereas Transcendence is more of a top row A item. It just, you know, stacking item, great for ability-based characters, but normally not as great as Devos for Hunters specifically, and for others it's often hard to fit it into their builds, and that's the problem. Void Shield. Very nice. Currently one of the, I would say, most frequently used items in multiple roles, with warriors in solo picking it up, with assassins picking up as a physical defense item. Very nice mix of stats. Yeah, that's all I really need to say. Wind Demon, I'll still give it an A. I think it's kind of similar to it's like Rage. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Not the craziest one out there, not the worst. Just something you pick up when you want the specific benefit from the specific item over others, which can or cannot be the case depending on the circumstance. Kind of like with Rage. when your game is going bad, then you're better off getting Wind Demon after like a Poison Star than getting Rage, you know. In most situations, you're gonna get Deathbringer anyways. Concise also dropped off a little bit. Used to be like super, super valued. Now it's still very much valued. It's still a good item. Just not always quite the supreme choice. Bit more situational. I'm also torn here. Somewhere between S- and A. Maybe... Considering how frequently it's still picked up on hunters and how useful it can be, and how useful it is on certain AA guards as well, like looking at Haste Katana, I think we can justify an S- here. But it could also just be an A item, you know, depending on circumstance. Bloodforge, when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it doesn't. If you're ahead enough, or if you're an assassin that can make good use of this item, it's great. When that's not the case, then nope. That's it. Deathbringer. Do I put Deathbringer in S-? Deathbringer is one of the better crit items. It definitely is something you want to fit in your build, but at the same time, it's so expensive and so hard to get true in the first place. It's still late game, so I think I'm going to put it A. Probably a bit better than the other crit items, but by no means worse than A for sure. Maybe more towards S-. Melis, on the other hand, more situational. Sure, if you're Najah, it's great, but on others, you often want the other crit items over it. More of a situational item that can be very good in those situations, so a B tier item. And then, of course, no list would be complete without a few things for SS. And that's wards. No matter who you are, wards win games. And you buy them every single game if you're on a decent level of play at least. Super useful on every character, in every situation, every role. If you're aggressing, if you're defending, you want wards. So they are up here. It's just, there's no weak point to wards other than other wards that count the wards. Here you go. And then we have some outliers here. Ragna's Mask, I think, is interesting. I think it's still more of a... It's still more of a niche item that only specific guards can make use of. But some guards can make very good use of it. We've seen more and more use of Ragna's Mask. And as such, I will put it in B, but it could have the tendency to go up to A for certain characters at least. The other one here is Bomba's Mask. Bomba's Mask, looking at physical damage characters, not magical damage characters, is, I think, one of the weaker items here. I think there's not really any guards where I could think of getting much use out of it right now. Maybe even D tier, like it's probably worse than most of the C tier items, but who knows? Maybe someone finds out something. I mean, like maybe like Amatera Sue or something can fit it in somehow. But as an aggressive choice for a physical, I don't think it's the best. It's more of a magical item overall, even though it doesn't have stats for either. But it's like CDR movement speed combination is just not that useful here. And then we have our power pod here. Our normal power pod, I think, is pretty solid. I think it's a good one to get, and the extra effects and everything is nice. So I'll just give that like an S-, because there's just often there's more value in getting this than upgrading your relics if you haven't upgraded them yet. Depends on the relic, of course, but as such, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And then or Elixir gets a... It's just a nice item, and it fits next to the L Skull. Yeah, that is the item tier list. Actually, no S+. I was kind of considering it with the Crusher. Maybe a little bit with like Void Shield as well, but I think right now most items are pretty good. We can kind of see that the top here is a bit more ability heavy than AA heavy. We only have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish AA items in the top rows. 6, sorry. 7. Whereas in the bottom area, we see all these weird, somewhat AA items or like weight AA hybrid items and that kind of stuff, which I think we'll need some looks at them. And then we have a very solid middle ground here in A tier of just overall good items. I think there's no item that's just completely broken right now, unless we're talking about specific item interactions on specific characters. And I think that's what counts, and I think Silver Branch will need some changes. And that's it for this video. I hope this was interesting, insightful, a little bit of a different approach from the usual. If you're new to the channel, feel free to smash that subscribe button. And other than that, I'll see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.